The irony was thicker than the gravy my mother was currently whisking for a dinner I wasn't invited to. It was Sunday evening, November 24th, exactly 6:47 p.m. I remember the time because I was in the middle of grading essays on the Great Depression. One of my students, a bright girl named Jasmine, had written a moving piece on how economic status can strip a person of their dignity. I didn't realize that, within seconds, my own mother would be providing a live demonstration. "Jewel, honey!" Patricia Mitchell's voice crackled over the speaker, coated in that synthetic sweetness she reserved for delivering bad news. "Vivian is bringing Derek to Thanksgiving. It's a very big deal for her. Derek's family is, well, they move in certain circles. Private equity, high-stakes investments. You understand, don't you?" "Understand what, Mom?" I asked, though the cold pit in my stomach already knew the answer. "Your career choice," she sighed, as if my master's degree in education was a shameful secret. "It might send the wrong message. Derek needs to see that our family is compatible with his lifestyle. Vivian is a marketing director now. Having a blue-collar teacher at the table, it just complicates the narrative she's built. We think it's best if you sit this one out." I looked at my red pen, poised over a paper about human rights. "I understand," I said. It was a reflex, the two words I had used for a decade to keep the peace. I hung up before she could offer a consolation prize, like a leftover Tupperware of turkey delivered the next day. But this time, the "I understand" didn't feel like a white flag. It felt like a fuse being lit. What my mother, Patricia, and my perfect sister, Vivian, didn't know was that while they were busy curating a fake life for a billionaire boyfriend, I had been quietly managing the reality of our family's future. My grandmother, Eleanor, had been the only one who saw me. She knew Vivian was a social climber and that my parents were her enablers. 2 years ago, when she passed, she left a $15 million trust. She didn't leave it to my father, the retired accountant who never stood up for me. She didn't leave it to Vivian, who spent money like it was water from a tap. She left it to me. I was the sole trustee. I had absolute discretion. In legal terms, that meant I held the keys to the kingdom, and I had spent 2 years keeping that kingdom a secret because I wanted to believe my family loved me for Jewel the teacher. Thanksgiving Day arrived, gray and biting. I spent it in my one-bedroom apartment in Somerville, eating a microwave turkey slice and watching the rain. At 8:47 p.m., the incendiary device arrived in the form of a text message from Vivian. It was a photo. My parents' mahogany table glowing under the chandelier. 4 place settings. Crystal glasses filled with expensive wine. My mother was beaming. My father looked coached. And Vivian was draped in cashmere next to Derek, a man who looked like he'd been carved out of a Brooks Brothers catalog. "Thanks for understanding, sis." Derek loved the dinner. He said our family is so put together. LOL. I stared at the photo. There was no empty chair. They hadn't even left a gap where I should have been. They had erased me to make the room look better. I didn't cry. I opened my laptop and sent a single, encrypted email to Margaret Caldwell, the estate attorney. "I am ready to exercise Section 4.2 of the Eleanor Mitchell Trust. Please prepare the annual review documents for Monday morning." The fallout didn't wait for Monday. On Friday afternoon, the storm arrived at my door. I heard the heavy thud of my mother's designer heels before the doorbell even rang. I opened the door to find Patricia, Vivian, and my father standing in the hallway, looking like they had just seen a ghost. "Jewel!" Vivian hissed, pushing past me. Her face was a mask of fury. "What did you do?" Derek's financial advisors ran a background check on the family before the engagement announcement. They found it, a $15 million trust in my name. And they found your name as the controller. Explain it. Now. I closed the door slowly and leaned against it. "It's called the Eleanor Mitchell Irrevocable Trust, Vivian. Grandma wanted it handled with discernment, something you've never practiced. You've been sitting on $15 million while I struggled to pay for my engagement party." My mother shrieked. her face turning a mottled purple. "While your father had to repair his boat on a loan. You selfish, spiteful girl." "I paid for that engagement party, Mom," I said calmly. "And I paid for Dad's boat. I did it out of my embarrassing teacher's salary, while you all treated me like a social stain. You told me my career sent the wrong message. Well, here is the right message. Grandma didn't trust you with the money. She trusted the teacher." Vivian stepped forward, her eyes darting to my modest furniture. "Give it to me. It's mine. The trust says I'm the beneficiary. It also says the trustee has absolute discretion over the timing and conditions of distributions," I countered. I walked to my small dining table and pulled out a chair. It was a simple, wooden chair I'd reupholstered myself. "Sit down, Vivian." "You too, Mom." They sat, though they looked like they were sitting on needles. My father stayed by the door, looking at the floor. "You excluded me from Thanksgiving because I didn't fit the image of a wealthy, successful Mitchell," I said, my voice steady. "You created a table with no room for me. So, I've decided to return the favor. The trust is now under a 12-month deferral." "You can't do that!" Vivian screamed. "I can, under the financial maturity clause. Since you've demonstrated that you value status over family and appearance over integrity, I've determined you aren't mature enough to handle the funds. For the next year, there will be no distributions, no wedding fund, no new condo, no Hartwell-compatible lifestyle." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother looked at the small kitchen, the piles of books, the life she had mocked, and realized it was now the only thing standing between them and the lifestyle they craved. "But Derek," Vivian whispered, her voice breaking. "If I don't have that money, the prenup, he'll think I lied about my standing." "Then tell him the truth," I suggested. "Tell him your sister, the teacher, thinks you need to learn the value of $1. I've already enrolled you in a personal finance course at the community college. Completion of that course is the first condition for the trust to be reopened next year." "You're humiliating me," she sobbed. "No," I said, standing up. "I'm educating you. It's what I do for a living, remember." I walked to the door and opened it. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have papers to grade. I'm currently teaching my students about the empty chair strategy, how those who are ignored often hold the most power once the music stops." My mother tried to speak, to deploy that forced warmth one last time, but she found no words. They filed out of my apartment, one by one. My father was the last. He paused at the threshold, looking at me with a mixture of shame and something that looked dangerously like pride. "I'm sorry, Jewel," he whispered. "I know, Dad," I said, "but sorry doesn't put a chair at the table. Only respect does." I closed the door and locked it. For the first time in my life, the apartment didn't feel small. It felt like a fortress. I sat back down at my desk, picked up my red pen, and finished grading Jasmine's essay. She got an A. Her conclusion was perfect. History isn't written by those who have the most, but by those who survive being forgotten. I smiled, adjusted my lamp, and started on the next paper. The music had stopped, and for the first time, I was the one who had a place to sit. The following Saturday, the grand ballroom of the Harrington Plaza was a sea of shimmering silk, sharp tuxedos, and the heavy scent of old money and new ambitions. This was the Beacon Hill Winter Charity Gala, the pinnacle of the Boston social calendar. For my sister, Vivian, it was her coming-out party, the night she would solidify her place beside Derek Hartwell, the crown prince of Hartwell Capital. For my mother, Patricia, it was a tactical mission to prove the Mitchells belonged among the elite. And for me, it was a Saturday night I had spent $200 on. I stood before the full-length mirror in my small apartment, smoothing down the fabric of a simple, floor-length black column dress. It was classic, sleeveless, and admittedly bought from a clearance rack at a department store 3 months ago. I didn't have a $5,000 gown or a necklace that cost a year's rent. I had something better pinned to the inside of my clutch, a gold embossed badge that read Jewel Mitchell, founding donor. For 3 years, I had funneled the personal bequest Grandma Eleanor left me, money separate from the $15 million trust, into this foundation. I believed in their mission to provide scholarships for underprivileged students. I had done it quietly, anonymously, because I didn't need the applause. But tonight, after being erased from the Thanksgiving table, I decided it was time to let the light hit the truth. I arrived at 7:30 p.m. While the main line for general attendees snaked around the lobby, I walked toward the discreet VIP entrance. The security guard, a man named Marcus whom I'd greeted every year, smiled warmly. "Good to see you again, Ms. Mitchell. The board is in the East Wing for the private reception." "Thank you, Marcus," I said, stepping into the belly of the beast. The transition from the quiet street to the ballroom was jarring. Chandelier light fractured against thousands of crystal glasses. I grabbed a glass of mineral water and began to scan the room. It didn't take long to find them. They were a beacon of vanity in the center of the floor. Vivian was draped in a silver gown that looked like liquid moonlight, her hand possessively tucked into Derek's arm. My mother stood beside them, her emerald green dress screaming for attention. They were laughing, performing the perfect choreography of a put-together family. I took a deep breath and began to walk, not toward them, but across their line of sight toward the silent auction tables. I felt Vivian's gaze hit me like a physical weight before I even heard her voice. "Jewel!" The laughter at their table died. I turned slowly, offering a polite, neutral smile. "Hello, Vivian. Mom. Derek." Vivian's eyes traveled down my body, her lip curling in a familiar, rehearsed sneer. She didn't even look at my face. She looked at the cut of my dress. "What on earth are you doing here? Did you sneak in through the kitchen?" My mother stepped forward, her face flushing with panic as she glanced around to see if anyone was watching. "Jewel, this is a $5,000 a plate event. You can't just appear here. It's embarrassing." "I was invited," I said simply. Vivian let out a sharp, mocking laugh that drew the attention of a nearby couple. "Invited? By who? The waitstaff? Look at that dress, Jewel. It's practically screaming end of season sale. You look like a substitute teacher who got lost on her way to a faculty meeting." Derek, to his credit, looked slightly uncomfortable. He shifted his weight, his eyes landing on me with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "Vivian, maybe she's with a friend," he offered quietly. "A friend? Derek, she makes $50,000 a year," Vivian snapped, her voice rising in her eagerness to humiliate me. "She probably spent her entire month's rent just to get past the doorman. Jewel, leave now, before you make a scene and ruin this for me. This is a room for people who matter, people who contribute." "I agree," I said, my voice cutting through her vitriol like a scalpel. "It is a room for people who contribute." Before Vivian could unleash her next insult, a shadow fell over our group. Arthur Sterling, the chairman of the foundation, and a man whose net worth made Derek Hartwell look like a small business owner, stepped forward. His face lit up with genuine warmth. "Jewel, I was worried you wouldn't make it tonight," Arthur said, ignoring the stunned silence of my family. He reached out and took my hand, shaking it with profound respect. "I was just telling the board that we wouldn't have been able to launch the inner-city literacy program without your continued support over the last 3 years." Vivian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. My mother looked like she was having a minor stroke. Derek stepped forward, his professional instincts kicking in. "Mr. Sterling, you know, Vivian's sister." Arthur turned to Derek, his expression cooling into the polite, distant mask of a titan. "Know her? Mr. Hartwell, Jewel Mitchell is one of our 3 founding donors. Her personal contributions have exceeded 6 figures annually. She's the reason this gala is happening in this ballroom and not a high school gym." Arthur then looked at the badge I finally pinned to the lapel of my department store dress. "In fact, Jewel, The board was hoping you'd say a few words before the keynote. As an educator yourself, your perspective is what gives this charity its heart. The silence that followed was absolute. The surrounding guests, sensing the shift in power, turned to stare. The embarrassing teacher was suddenly the center of gravity. "I'd be honored, Arthur," I said. As Arthur moved to talk to another donor, Derek turned to Vivian. The look in his eyes wasn't love anymore. It was calculation and disappointment. "You told me she was a charity case," Derek said, his voice low and dangerous. "You told me she was a burden on your family's reputation. You didn't mention she was a major philanthropist. You didn't mention she was the one holding the Mitchell name up in this city." "Derek, I didn't know," Vivian stammered, her silver dress now looking gaudy and cheap in the harsh light of the truth. "She hid it. She was being spiteful." "She wasn't hiding," Derek countered, looking at me with a newfound, sharp respect. "She was being humble. There's a difference, one that apparently you don't understand." He looked at my mother, who was trying to blend into the wallpaper, then back at me. "Ms. Mitchell." "Jewel, I apologize. It seems I've been remarkably misinformed about who the important members of this family are." "It's a common mistake, Derek," I said, taking a sip of my water. "People often confuse price tags with value." The rest of the night was a blur of high society wreckage. Derek spent the evening by my side, asking about the trust and my work in the classroom, completely ignoring Vivian's attempts to reclaim his attention. By the time the main course was served, the whispers had traveled the room. The story of the teacher trustee was the new currency of the gala. Vivian and my mother left before the dessert was served, unable to endure the pitying glances from the very people they had spent years trying to impress. Their social standing, built on a foundation of lies and exclusion, had crumbled in the span of an hour. As I stood on the stage later that night, looking out at the crowd, I saw Derek sitting at a table near the front. He wasn't looking at his phone or his wine. He was listening. I realized then that the empty chair strategy hadn't just worked at home. It had worked here. By refusing to fight for a seat at their table, I had forced them to realize that the table only had legs because I was the one holding it up. I walked out of the Harrington Plaza at midnight. The cold air felt like a benediction. I didn't need a silver gown or a billionaire boyfriend. I had my dignity, I had my grandmother's legacy, and I had the truth. I hailed a taxi, the yellow light reflecting off my gold badge. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the Grand Hotel one last time. The Mitchells wanted a story to tell the world. Well, tonight, they got one. It just wasn't the one they had written. I leaned back into the vinyl seat and closed my eyes. The music hadn't just stopped. The entire orchestra had changed its tune. And for the first time in 32 years, I liked the melody. The taxi dropped me off in front of my Somerville apartment at 1 a.m. I climbed the 3 flights of creaky stairs, the silence of the hallway a stark contrast to the thrumming bass and polished laughter of the Harrington Plaza. I stepped into my kitchen, kicked off my $40 clearance heels, and sat at the small table I'd reupholstered myself. On the table sat a single, unopened envelope from my grandmother, Eleanor Mitchell. She had written it 2 months before she died, with the instruction that I should read it only when I felt the weight of a silence became too heavy to carry. For 2 years, I had kept that envelope sealed. I had kept the $15 million trust a secret. I had kept my role as the gatekeeper of the Mitchell legacy hidden behind a veil of lesson plans and grading rubrics. I had done it because I was a romantic. I wanted to believe that if I stripped away the money, the status, and the potential for inheritance, my mother would still call me just to hear my voice. I wanted to believe that Vivian would want me at her wedding because I was her sister, not because I was a financial asset. I had used my silence as a filter, hoping to catch a few grains of genuine love in the vast, sandy desert of my family's ambition. But the filter was empty. The Thanksgiving invitation, or rather, the lack of one, had been the final piece of evidence. They didn't want Jewel to teach her because she wasn't refined enough for their new world. They wanted a version of a daughter that didn't exist, and they were willing to delete the real one to maintain the illusion. I picked up the letter and finally broke the seal. "My dearest Jewel," it began. "If you are reading this, it means you finally realize that some people only see the light when it's filtered through a diamond. You've likely spent the last few years being the invisible one. I gave you the trust not to punish them, but to protect you. I knew they would try to trade your worth for a seat at a higher table. Remember this, Jewel. Money doesn't make a person refined. It only makes them louder. If they cannot value the daughter who works, they do not deserve the grandmother who built. Do what you must." I let the letter rest against my chest. The cost of my silence had been 2 years of loneliness and subtle humiliations, but the profit was clarity. I knew exactly who they were now. Monday morning arrived with the clinical precision of a scalpel. I met Margaret Caldwell at 9 a.m. Her office in Back Bay was quiet, smelling of old paper and expensive leather. She sat across from me, a folder containing 47 pages of legal directives between us. "The gala has caused quite a stir, Jewel," Margaret said, her eyes twinkling with a hint of professional mischief. "I've had 3 calls from your mother's attorney this morning. They are questioning the validity of the beneficiary readiness clause you invoked on Friday." "Let them question it," I said, leaning back. "Grandma was very specific. The trustee has absolute discretion. Section 4.2 states that I can defer distributions if the beneficiary demonstrates a lack of fiscal responsibility or character detrimental to the preservation of the family legacy. And you believe being uninvited from Thanksgiving falls under character detrimental to the legacy." "I believe," I said, my voice as steady as the one I used to settle a rowdy classroom, "that if Vivian and my mother are too refined to sit at a table with a teacher, then they are too irresponsible to manage the wealth that was built by a woman who started her life as a seamstress. My grandmother valued hard work and family loyalty. Vivian values cashmere and private equity. That is a character misalignment." Margaret nodded, scribbling a note. "The deferral is official as of 10 a.m. today. No funds will be released for the wedding, the engagement party expenses, or the lifestyle maintenance Vivian requested." "What about the loans your parents took?" "They can pay them back," I said, "with interest, just like any other adult." I left the office and walked toward the train station. My phone began to buzz in my pocket. It was a relentless, vibrating demand for my attention. I didn't answer until I was safely tucked into a corner seat on the Red Line. "What do you want, Mom?" "Jewel." "Thank God." Patricia's voice was frantic, the refined mask completely gone. "The caterer for Vivian's engagement party just called. The payment was bounced by the estate. There must be some mistake. You have to call them and fix it. Derek's family is coming over for brunch tomorrow to discuss the wedding venue. We can't have this hanging over us." "There's no mistake, Mom," I said, watching the tunnel lights flicker past. "The funds are frozen. For 12 months. 12 months. Jewel, the wedding is in June. You're being vindictive, just because we thought Derek would be overwhelmed by my career." I interrupted. "By my lack of refinement." "Mom, let's be honest. You didn't exclude me to protect Derek. You excluded me to protect your own ego. You were ashamed of me." "We weren't ashamed. We were strategic," she stammered. "Well, now I'm being strategic," I countered. "Grandma Eleanor gave me this trust to ensure the money went to someone who understood its value, someone who lived in the real world. You and Vivian have spent 30 years trying to escape the real world. You want to be refined? Fine. Be refined on your own dime. If you want the Mitchell money, you have to show the Mitchell character. And right now, your account is overdrawn." I hung up. By the time I reached my school, Vivian had sent 12 texts. Most were insults, but the last one was a plea. "Derek is asking questions, Jewel. He's asking why the estate is being audited. He thinks I lied about our net worth. Please, just sign the release for the deposit. I'll make it up to you. I'll buy you a new car. I'll tell everyone you were busy with work on Thanksgiving. Just fix this. I stared at the screen. I'll buy you a new car. Even now, she thought she could buy her way back into my good graces. She didn't offer an apology. She offered a bribe. I didn't reply. I walked into my third period history class. The students were buzzed, talking about the upcoming winter break. Jasmine, the girl who had written the essay on dignity, looked up at me as I walked to the chalkboard. "Ms. Mitchell, you okay?" she asked. "You look different today." "I am different, Jasmine," I said, picking up a piece of chalk. "I finally learned a lesson I should have mastered years ago." "What lesson?" "The cost of silence," I said, writing the words in large, bold letters on the board. We often think that by staying quiet, we are being strong. We think that if we don't demand respect, people will eventually give it to us out of the goodness of their hearts. But history shows us that power is never given. It is only acknowledged when you refuse to be invisible. That night, my father called. Unlike my mother and sister, he didn't scream. He sounded tired. "Your mother is a wreck, Jewel," he said quietly. "Vivian is talking about calling Derek's father to explain, but she's afraid it will make it worse." "Why did you do it this way? Why didn't you tell us 2 years ago?" "Because I wanted to know if you love me, Dad," I said, the words catching in my throat for the first time. "I wanted to know if I had a place at your table because I was your daughter. I gave you 2 years of silence to prove that my embarrassing job and my simple life were enough for you. You had 730 days to show me I mattered, and you chose the 731st day to tell me I didn't." There was a long pause on the other end. "I should have said something to your mother," he whispered, "when she suggested the Thanksgiving plan. I should have said no." "Yes," I said. "You should have, but you were silent too. And now we're all paying the cost." I ended the call and looked at the photo Vivian had sent to the Thanksgiving table. For chairs, no gaps. I took the photo and moved it to a folder on my computer titled The Old Melody. Then, I opened a new document. I began to draft the requirements for the Trust's reopening, financial literacy courses for Vivian, a formal apology to the Foundation, and a mandatory family therapy session where the word refinement was banned. I wasn't being a tyrant. I was being a teacher. I was setting a curriculum for a family that had failed the most basic test of all. As I sat there, the quiet of the apartment felt different. It wasn't the silence of being ignored. It was the silence of a house before a storm that finally clears the air. The cost of my silence had been high, but the price of my voice was even higher. And for the first time in 32 years, I was more than willing to pay it. I closed my laptop and looked at the clock. 11:30 p.m. Tomorrow was Tuesday. I had a lecture to give on the Industrial Revolution, about how the world changed when the people who did the work finally realized they were the ones who held the power. I smiled, thinking of Jasmine and my students. I had spent so long teaching them how to find their voices. It was about time I started practicing what I preached. I walked to my bedroom, the floorboards creaking under my feet like an old friend, and for the first time in a long time, I slept without wondering if I was enough. I knew I was, and soon the rest of the Mitchells would know it too. Tuesday morning in my American history classroom felt different. Usually, I was the one trying to convince 30 restless teenagers that the labor strikes of the 1890s mattered to their 2026 lives. But today, as I stood before the whiteboard with a marker in hand, the parallels between the Gilded Age and the Mitchell family dynamics were so sharp they felt like glass. Power, I told the class, circling the word in red, is rarely about who has the most money in the bank. It's about who controls the distribution of resources and the narrative of worth. The robber barons thought they were untouchable because they owned the rails and the oil. But they forgot one thing. They didn't own the people who made the rails move. They forgot the social contract. Jasmine raised her hand. "So, you're saying that if the workers stop working, the money stops being real?" "Exactly," I said, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. A contract is only as good as the accountability behind it. As the bell rang, I checked my phone. I had 17 missed calls from an unknown number, likely Vivian using a burner or a friend's phone, and one very polite email from Derek Hartwell. Jewel, I'd like to speak with you. Not about the money, but about the narrative Vivian presented. I think I've been looking at the wrong map. Coffee. Name the place. I didn't answer Vivian. Instead, I sent Derek the address of a gritty, no-nonsense diner 3 blocks from my school. If he wanted to talk to the real Jewel, he'd have to do it over burnt coffee and vinyl seats that smelled of old grease. An hour later, I sat in a booth at the Rusty Spoon. Derek Hartwell looked absurdly out of place in his tailored charcoal suit, but to his credit, he didn't complain about the sticky table. I ran the numbers, Derek began, skipping the small talk. He looked exhausted. The trust, the foundations, the personal bequests. You've been the one keeping the Mitchell name afloat in the philanthropic circles for years. Why let them treat you like a charity case? Why play the disappointment? Because in history, Derek, the best way to understand an empire's true strength is to watch how it treats its most vulnerable citizens when it thinks no one is watching, I said. I wanted to see if my family had any internal ethics left. They failed the test. Vivian is spiraling, he admitted, staring into his black coffee. The engagement is on ice. My partners are asking why I'm marrying into a family that's being audited by their own daughter. She says you're holding her inheritance hostage. I'm not holding it hostage. I corrected him, my teacher voice slipping into gear. I'm putting it in escrow. In labor law, if a party refuses to negotiate in good faith, the contract is suspended. Vivian hasn't shown good faith. She's shown entitlement. My grandmother's trust isn't a lottery win, it's a fiduciary responsibility. If she can't manage a Thanksgiving guest list without being a bigot, she certainly can't manage $15 million. So what's the end game? I pulled a folder from my leather satchel, the same one I use for student portfolios. I slid it across the table. It's a syllabus, Derek. For my family. He opened it. His eyebrows shot up. Section 1, Restitution of Funds. Section 2, Certified Financial Literacy Course. Section 3, Labor History and Ethics Seminar. If she wants the money, she has to understand the work that went into it, I said. My grandmother didn't want a socialite. She wanted a successor. If Vivian wants to be a Mitchell, she has to earn the grade. Derek looked at the document, then at me. For the first time, he didn't look at me as Vivian's teacher sister. He looked at me as a peer, perhaps even a superior. You're not just a teacher, are you? You're a strategist. Every good teacher is a strategist, Derek. We deal with 30 different personalities every hour and try to move them toward a goal they didn't know they had. Managing my sister is just a remedial class. The remedial class began that evening. I didn't go to their house. I made them come to my apartment. Patricia and Vivian arrived at 6 p.m. My mother looked like she hadn't slept, her hair slightly less perfect than usual. Vivian looked like she wanted to set my curtains on fire. My father trailed behind them, carrying a box of pastries as a pathetic peace offering. Sit, I said, pointing to the mismatched chairs in my living room. Jewel, this has gone far enough, Patricia started, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and desperation. Derek's father called us. The Hartwells are talking about a character clause in the prenup. You are destroying your sister's future. No, Mom, I said, leaning against my bookshelf. Vivian's character is destroying her future. I'm just the one documenting the evidence. Now you have 2 choices. You can keep screaming, or you can look at the syllabus. A syllabus? Vivian spat the word like it was a slur. I am an adult. I have a career. I don't need a syllabus from a girl who spends her days talking about the Great Depression. The Great Depression is exactly what you're facing if you don't listen, I said, my voice dropping to a level of authority that usually made my rowdiest seniors go silent. The trust is frozen. To unfreeze it, Vivian, you will do the following. First, you will repay the $3,000 I contributed to your engagement party with interest. I want it back in my account by Friday. I am a blue-collar teacher, after all. I need the money more than you do. Vivian flinched. The irony was a physical blow. Second, I continued, you will enroll in the Introduction to Financial Management course at the community college. Not a private tutor. A real classroom with real people. You will provide me with your midterm and final grades. If you get anything lower than AB, the freeze extends another 6 months. You can't be serious, my mother whispered. Third, I said, ignoring her, you will attend a series of Saturday seminars I'm hosting here. We're going to talk about the history of the Mitchell wealth. You're going to learn about the seamstresses and the factory workers Grandma Eleanor championed. You're going to learn that wealth isn't a shield to hide behind. It's a tool to build with. If you can't respect the people who have less than you don't deserve to have more than them. And if I don't, Vivian asked, her jaw tight, then the money stays in the trust, accruing interest for the Beacon Hill Foundation, I said. I've already drafted the paperwork to move the primary beneficiary status to a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. They actually want to learn. They actually have work ethics. They wouldn't dream of uninviting a teacher to dinner. My father finally spoke. She's right, Pat. She's doing what Eleanor wanted. We've been shallow. Patricia turned on him, but the fire was gone. She looked at me, seeing for the first time the woman I had become in the decade I'd spent away from their dinner table. I wasn't the disappointment anymore. I was the one holding the ledger. I was the one who determined who passed and who failed. Friday, I said, opening the door. $3,000 plus 5% interest. And the enrollment receipt for the college. Class starts in January, Vivian. Don't be late. As they filed out, Vivian paused. She looked at my small, cramped apartment, then at the folder in her hand. For a split second, the fury in her eyes was replaced by something else, fear. The fear of a student who realized they hadn't studied for the most important test of their life. I hate you, she whispered. I know, I replied calmly. But by the end of the semester, you'll at least respect me. And more importantly, you might finally respect yourself. I closed the door and turned off the overhead light. The apartment was quiet again, but the air felt charged. I had spent years being the student of their dysfunction, taking notes on their cruelty and studying their dismissals. But the roles had finally flipped. I was the educator now, and the Mitchells were about to find out that Jewel Mitchell didn't give out easy A's. I sat down at my desk and pulled out a fresh red pen. I had a new stack of essays to grade, and for the first time in a long time, my own life felt like a lesson plan that was finally coming together. Class was in session, and the first lesson was simple. Accountability is a debt that always comes due. By Friday afternoon, the debt arrived with a digital chime. My banking app notified me of a transfer, $3,150. $3,000 for the engagement party contribution they had bullied out of me, and $150 in interest. The note attached to the transaction was a single word, satisfied? I wasn't satisfied. Satisfaction was a fleeting emotion, the kind of cheap thrill Vivian got from a new pair of designer shoes. What I felt was something far more structural. I felt like an architect who had finally found the flaw in a building's foundation and was now deciding whether to brace it or let the whole thing crumble. For years, the Mitchells had operated on a specific hierarchy. At the top was Patricia, the social engineer, then Vivian, the shiny product, followed by my father, the silent financier, and finally me, the charity case. They looked at my $58,000 salary and saw a failure of ambition. They didn't realize that while they were busy spending money they hadn't earned, I was the one protecting the money they desperately needed. As the inheritance gatekeeper, I held the absolute discretion over $15 million. To my family, that money was a weapon. To me, it was a pedagogical tool. The first Saturday seminar took place in my living room. I didn't offer wine or hors d'oeuvres. I offered hard wooden chairs and a stack of photocopied primary documents. My mother arrived in a trench coat that probably cost 3 of my paychecks, looking around my apartment as if she were inspecting a disaster zone. Vivian sat as far away from me as possible, her arms crossed, her eyes red-rimmed. Derek was gone. He had officially moved into a hotel, citing a need for transparency that Vivian clearly couldn't provide. "Welcome," I said, standing by my bookshelf. "Today's lesson is on labor and legacy. We aren't going to talk about your wedding, Vivian. We aren't going to talk about Mom's social standing. We're going to talk about Grandma Eleanor. We know who Grandma was." "Jewel," Vivian snapped. She was a wealthy woman who clearly had a lapse in judgment at the end. "Incorrect," I said, my voice sharp. Grandma Eleanor was a woman who started in a textile mill in Lowell. She spent 14 hours a day inhaling lint and losing the feeling in her fingers so she could eventually buy the patent that built this trust. She was a laborer before she was a lady, and she left this money to the granddaughter who understood the sweat behind the dollar. I slid a photo across the coffee table. It was Eleanor at age 20, her face smudged with soot, standing outside a factory. "You see this woman?" I asked. "She wouldn't have been invited to your Thanksgiving table either, Vivian. She didn't have the right shoes. She didn't move in certain circles. She was blue-collar, just like me." My mother looked at the photo, then away. "Jewel, we realize we made a mistake with the dinner. We've apologized. Can't we just move past this? The Hartwells are backing out of the merger with your father's old firm because of this instability. You're hurting all of us. Respect isn't a mistake you move past, Mom. It's a standard you maintain," I replied. "You didn't treat me like a charity case because I was poor. You treated me that way because you thought I was powerless. You valued me based on a ledger. Well, the ledger has turned. How does it feel to be the ones asking for a handout?" The room went silent. The power shift was palpable, heavy enough to drown out the sound of the Somerville traffic outside. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one defending my choices. They were the ones defending their existence. Over the next month, the gatekeeper role became a test of my own character. There were moments when I was tempted by revenge. I could have bought a penthouse in Back Bay. I could have publicized the trust conditions and watched Vivian's social life go up in flames. I could have made them beg. But as I sat in my classroom on Monday mornings, looking at students like Jasmine and Marcus, I remembered that a good educator doesn't seek to break the student. They seek to break the ignorance. In mid-January, Vivian called me. It wasn't a scream. It was a question. "Jewel," her voice was small. "I'm in the accounting lab at the college. I don't understand the difference between a fiduciary duty and a standard of care. The textbook is confusing." I looked at the stack of essays on my desk, then at the phone. For a second, I wanted to tell her to figure it out herself. I wanted to remind her that I was just a teacher, but then I remembered Grandma Eleanor's letter. "I want you to teach her. A fiduciary duty is the highest legal grade of responsibility, Vivian," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. "It means you have to put the other person's interests above your own. It's what I've been doing for you for 2 years. It's what you failed to do for me at Thanksgiving." There was a long silence on the line. I heard a sniffle. "I'm failing the quiz, Jewel. I've never actually had to study for something that mattered this much." "Then stay on the line," I said. "Open your notebook. Let's go over the basics of accountability." We talked for 2 hours. We didn't talk as sisters, not yet, but we talked as a teacher and a student. For the first time, Vivian wasn't performing. She was trying. The turning point came in February. My mother invited me to lunch. I expected another lecture on family loyalty, but when I arrived at the cafe, she was wearing a simple sweater and no jewelry. She looked older. "I saw Vivian's midterm," Patricia said, picking at a salad. "She got a B+. She's actually proud of it. She showed it to Derek." And he told her that a B+ from a community college was more impressive than the fake marketing degree he thought she had. Mom said, her eyes meeting mine. They're talking again. But he told her he won't marry her until she finishes your syllabus. He told her he prefers the version of her that actually works for something. I took a sip of my tea. And what do you think, Mom? Patricia leaned forward. I think I spent 30 years trying to build a house of cards, and I realized that you're the only one who actually built a home. I was ashamed of your salary because I was afraid of the reality it represented. I was afraid that if we weren't elite, we were nothing. But seeing you stand your ground, seeing you control that trust with such dignity. She paused, the words sticking. I'm not just sorry, Jewel. I'm impressed. I didn't let her off the hook completely. Respect is earned in inches, not miles. I appreciate that, Mom. But the trust stays deferred until the year is up. Accountability isn't a one-time payment. It's a lifestyle change. I know, she said. We're attending the seminars on Saturday. Your father even started reading that labor history book you gave him. By the time the school year ended in June, the Mitchell family had been dismantled and reassembled. Vivian passed her course. She didn't get the lavish wedding she wanted. Not yet. She and Derek decided to have a small, private ceremony in the fall. She told me she wanted to save the trust money for a real investment, something that would honor Grandma's legacy. On the last day of school, I stood in my empty classroom, the afternoon sun casting long shadows over the desks. I looked at the chalkboard, where the words, "The cost of silence," had long been erased, replaced by the value of voice. I was still a teacher. I still made $58,000 a year. I still lived in my Somerville apartment. But I was no longer the charity case. I was the gatekeeper. I had used the money not to buy their love, but to buy back my own place at the table, a table that I now realized I didn't need their permission to sit at. I picked up my leather satchel and walked toward the door. My phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. Hey, Jewel. We're having a small Sunday dinner. Just us. No investors. No status guests. Dad's grilling. There's a chair with your name on it. Literally. I painted it myself. Hope you can make it. I smiled, tucked the phone into my pocket, and walked out into the warm June air. Class was officially over for the summer, and for the first time in my life, every single one of my students, including the ones at home, had finally passed the test. I headed toward the train, my heart light and my head held high. The Mitchell family finally had a new narrative, and this time it was written in the ink of truth. As I walked, I could almost hear Grandma Eleanor's voice in the breeze, whispering the final lesson. The only way to truly keep wealth is to be willing to give it all away for the sake of your soul. I was a teacher. I was a trustee. And finally I was home.